Hello everyone. I see that you're still here, so it's nice. It's the end of the day. I hope that you can stay until the end. So who I am? I'm a contractor. I work for the Angular core team. I've joined them 2 months ago, so I'm still new. And I've wrote a lot of libraries and stuff like that. I'm doing stuff on the internet, so you might know me from Angular Air, for example. And today, I'm going to show you how you can use Angular to translate your application with just Angular, without any external library. So, internationalization, also known as IATN. What can Angular do for you? So the way Angular does IATN is that it's pushing you towards using AOT, because what we want to do at Google is that people build their application, and at build time it will replace your strings with the translations. And you can still use it in just-in-time. We will see that during this hour, but we prefer if you use AOT. And with Angular, right now, you can only use IATN in your templates. I know that a lot of people want to use it in your code as well. So it's a feature I'm working on right now, and should be available pretty soon, in 2 months or so, if everything goes according to plan. And so let's see how it works. First, you update your code to use IATN. Before I start this, if you want to code along with me, you should create a new application with the CLI, because it might take a while to download the packages. So just create a new application. You can name it however you want, IATN Workshop, for example. And once you've created it, just make sure that you update package.json and replace the Angular dependencies with 4.1 beta 0, because I'm going to show some of the things that are brand new, and you can still use 4.0, but it'd be nice if you had 4.1. Okay, so you update your code. You add IATN tags and everything in your templates. And then the next thing that you have to do is to extract those messages that you added that you want to translate. So we have nice CLI tools that you can use for that, and it will create a file that you can then send to your translators, or you can translate yourself. And we don't cover the translation part. You should use an external tool. There are a lot of great tools out there that you can use for that. I'll add some link at the end if you want some examples. And once you have your translation, you should merge those translations back into your code. And you can do that in just-in-time, JIT, or in AOT. We will see both of those steps. And then the last part is serve your application. So with Angular IATN, you have to reload your application if you change the language. And the reason for that is that for AOT, you will build your file for each language. So you will have to reload those files because you don't have the compiler in AOT, and then you cannot use IATN. So it has to reload the build-it file. And in just-in-time, we have the same behavior. You have to reload the application because you will give the translation at bootstrap, and you cannot re-bootstrap your application without reloading the page. Okay, so let's prepare the code. How can you use IATN? In your templates, there are a lot of different ways to do it. The first one is to add an IATN tag attribute to your elements, and you can add some text to this attribute. separated in three parts. The first one is the meaning, then the description, and then the last one is the ID. All of them are optionals. It's just that it helps to add meaning and description for the people who will translate your application. If it's not you, they might not know that your title, for example, is not the main title of your application, it's just some part of it, or that validate is the button for this part of your application, things like that. And the ID is so that when you change the text, it doesn't change the ID in your translation files, because by default, when you extract the strings, we will generate a random ID, not random, we generate an ID based on the content of your tags. So if you change the text, the ID will be different. It can be nice to set the ID yourself so that it doesn't change when you extract again your strings. And then if it's just some text in the middle of a big part of your code that you want to translate, you can use commands as well. I usually prefer to just use a span, but you can use commands if you want. And then if you want to translate attributes, for example, the alt attribute in an img, in an image, you just add IATN dash at the beginning, and it will take the content of alt as the string to translate. And the same thing that you did before, you can add the meaning, description, and ID. And it works for all attributes, even if you add custom attributes. You just add IATN dash before that, and it has to be a string. It doesn't work with variables. Okay, so let's see this quickly in your application. So with the CLI, you just created a new application, and then you have this app component there. So I put the template inside of the component because it's easier for me, but you can have an external template as well. So if you want to translate your title here, the string is in your component, so you should put it back inside of your template. Okay. You put it back here. It's better if you remove the trailing and tailing and leading spaces, because otherwise they will be extracted as well. And then you add IATN here. And so when you extract, it will extract the content of this tag, so appworks. And if you want to add some meaning, you can just do it like this. Meaning, you separate with the pipe for the description, and for the ID, it's like this, double at. You can use, let's say that you create a div here, and then it has some text in it, and you also have some other tags in the middle. For example, you can have another one here with more text. If you want to translate all of that, you can just put IATN on the first one, and all of that will be extracted. And you can also use variable in the middle. They will be replaced with placeholders once you extract. So if you have some, I don't know, items, for example, which is an array of something, and you use items here, you will see them in the extracted text after that. Okay, so we added some content. Yeah, let's create an image as well. And since we don't have any image in our code, in our application right now, it will fail, and we will see the alt text. So don't forget to add the IATN alt if you want to see the translation later. You don't have to add anything. Yeah. Okay, so let's let's serve the application. Right now, we haven't done any translation. We just added the code, so it should work exactly the same with or without IATN tags, attributes. ng-serve. Okay, it's building. Okay, so yeah, we have the alt here. So this is in English, and you can write your application in any locale. You can set the source locale when you extract and when you merge your code, your translation back into your application. So let's see how we can extract the strings. Yeah. Before we do that, we have this nice thing in Angular named ICU, which is internationalization component for Unicode. It's a standard thing that exists in a lot of languages, and we use it in Angular as well. How does it work? So let's say that you have some elements, which is a number. You can use the ICU plural to have a different text depending on the number of elements. And the other ICU that you can use is select, which in this case we will have different text depending on a string. So the first one is for numbers, the second one is for string. And for plural ICUs, you can use equal and a number, any number that you want. Or you have some keywords, such as other, and you also have few, many, 1 and 2, and 0 that you can use. They can be used in some languages, such as Russian, for example, where they have different plurals depending on the number of elements. And you will use few and many in those cases. If you want to see the list of plural rules, in the code we have a nice switch with all the locales, and for some of them we have some rules. Some are more complicated than others. So, for example, the Russian, see, in some numbers you use few, in other many, and for the rest other. And this is defined in the Unicode spec, so you can see this is really, really, really long. And this is a nice thing to have when you translate, because you can use it, or the translator can remove it if he doesn't need to use it. But you have to be aware that it depends on the locale. It will apply the rules if the local ID that you provide is one that has those special rules. Let's add some of these inside of our application so that we can see them when we extract. So we can, let's copy past this. It's going to be faster. Okay, so the ICU is surrounded by a simple bracket at the start and at the end. Then you have the variable on which it will depend. So let's use items here. And then you give the name of the ICU, plural or select. And then you define some rules. And you can use, inside of your text, you can use variables as well. So items. In this case, usually the IDs don't really like this kind of thing because they don't understand ICUs. So you might have some error code here, but it actually works. So in this case, we have 0 elements, so we should see no selection. And it works even before you extract the text. So if I save my application, my code, and I check here, you see that I had no elements, so it outputs no selection. So this is something that you can use even if you don't want to translate your application, but you want to have some kind of switch case for your text. in your language, you can use ICU. Just have to make sure that you add the IATN tag attribute on your elements. And if you want to add some select as well. And yeah, a nice thing is that you can mix those ICUs. You can use another ICU inside of this one. So let's say that instead of you have one element, and you want to say that she or he gave me, then you would use another ICU select inside of it. One element that I got from, so let's say that gender here equal female, and so the different values are before the text. So in this case, the different string values of gender should be male or female, but you can have how many you want in this. It's just a simple check against the string. So if I save this, let's say that I add an element. One element that I got from her, because the value was female. Okay, now let's see how we can extract those. So the extraction uses something called ng-conf, which is inside the compiler CLI. It's the same package that contains ngC that you will use for AOT when you build for AOT. So with the CLI, you have some special commands that you can use as well. And the parameters are all the same with or without the CLI. You just remove the dash here. And with the CLI, there's just one thing that you can use. It's the output pass. So when you say that your file will be an XLF file, you have two choices, XLF or XMB. I will explain later what the difference is. And the out file, you can give a pass here, but with the CLI, you can put the pass in output pass if you prefer. And then the local is the local of your application before translation. In this case, we use en, but you can put anything here. Just try to remember that you have to use, you'd better use one of the official language strings. So you have en or en-US, for example, en-UK, FR-CR, and those kind of strings. It's what you can get when you use the navigator language in your browser. And so let's use this one with the CLI for application. So yeah, we have two formats. XLF is the one by default, and it's both of the formats are XML based, but XLF is what you will use in a lot of other languages as well. For example, if you write an iOS application, you will use XLF files. XMB is something that Google uses, and mostly Google. If you use Clojure, you can use XMB files as well with Clojure, but Clojure is from Google, so that's why. So in this case, we will use XLF. And the reason why I told you to use 4.1 beta 0 is that because the ICU expression were not extracted before 4.1 for XLF. So if you use 4.0, you won't see those rules won't be extracted in your translation files. So let's run this command and see. It should create a file named source.xlf inside of src IATN. And to do that, the CLI will rebuild your whole application. So you will see as well a build folder, this folder created here, because it needs to resolve all of your files. If you load templates, for example, external files and stuff like that, it has to compile the whole application to make sure that you have everything. And so it created a source XLF. And this is a nice XML, and we all love XML. In this case, this is all of the IATN things that we added in our template. So you can see that, so the first one, for example, is the title that we had here. We added meaning, description, and ID, and we can find them here, meaning, description, and the ID for this, this string, this message. The source is the actual text in your code. And when you do your translation, you will copy this file for each language that you want to do. And for example, if I want to translate this in French, I will create another copy of this, and I will add the translation inside of target here. So and when I load this, it will replace AppWorks with the French l'application function. And so you should do it for all of your translation. And you can see that ICU, oh, yeah, let's see first the variables that we had inside of some text. Here, we had item. We can find it here replaced with this tag, this interpolation, so that when your translator takes this file, if they have to move around the interpolation, they can move it, for example, at the beginning or in the middle of the sentence, and it will work in your application as well. And you can see that the ID here is generated by Angular because we didn't set this in our template. So for the image, this is the alt attribute, and it's extracted as well. And the ICUs, you will have two different unit parts. You have the original text from here, and then the ICU is extracted inside of another trans unit here. And this can be a bit hard to translate because your translator should not translate plural or var plural. So it's, for this kind of things, it's nice to have a good translation tool that takes ICUs into account and that will not offer to translate those keywords, but only the content. In this case, no selection or one element. And you can see the second ICU is embedded inside of the first one. And if here we use a variable. Okay, so now that we have created one file for a French translation, I will add some translation, otherwise it will create an error. One thing to know as well is that your translator can remove those if they don't need. You would just lose the interpolation inside of your text at the end. But sometimes it's useful. I'm gonna leave the other one empty so that you can see what it does. So this was a translate part. Let's see how we can merge our code. So for just-in-time, you have to add some providers at the bootstrap of your application. And there are 3 main providers that you can use and a fourth one that is something optional. So the first thing that you have to provide are the translation. In this case, I will use require to load it because the CLI uses Webpack, so this will work, but you would probably do something dynamic so that it loads the correct file. But in this case, just for this example, I will do it like this. As a translation format, you will have to specify if it's XLF or XMB, so that the compiler can understand the files that you give him. In the future, we plan to add something that auto-detects the format, so that you don't have to provide this anymore. And then the last non-optional value is local ID. By default, Angular uses EN-US, but you have to. It's better to provide French in this case, because you can use this inside of your code to, for example, if you have a select with the different languages, you might want to say that this application is currently in French. So you will use a local ID for that. And it also changes how ICU expressions are understood by the parser, and how some pipes, such as date pipe or things like that, will write your dates for the French language. It's different than for the English. The last one is if you want to change the missing translation strategy. So how your application will react when some translations are missing. By default, it's warning, but you can use error or ignore. And this only works with just-in-time application right now. We need to add it for AOT as well, but it will probably be some parameter for the CLI, or for the CLI probably. So let's see how we can merge this inside of our application. I'm going to copy this. So with the CLI, you have to edit the main. We just add this here. Let's not use this right now. So okay, if I want to use require, I have to add something inside of the typing. Otherwise, the CLI will not will fail. Okay, and then inside main. Okay, this is the right path, I think. Yeah. So what we are going to do here is that we say that we want to use French translation inside of our application. And remember that we only translated 2 of them. So let's see what it does. So the part that I translated worked, but you cannot see the part that I didn't translate it. Because when you just have the target element like this, it's like an empty target element. So it used an empty text. If I add this and save, did it recompile or not? Oh yeah, it worked. I didn't have to reload it. So in this case, you can see that it takes the French translations, but you probably want to have something dynamic that you can change. So with the CLI, there is this nice feature that you can use. And it's for AOT. You can actually serve your application with AOT. So that means that you can change those commands that you will give to ng-serve, so that you can change the file and the local with the CLI. So this means that you can create a script for each language if you want to serve this application when you test in each language. And if you want to merge your translation without the CLI, so you will pass arguments to the ngc so that it can load those translations inside of your application when it builds, and it will replace those elements inside of your builded files. So that means that you have to build your application for each language, and you will have to serve each of those depending on, for example, the accept language from the browser or the navigator language or stuff like that. So you have to decide how you will detect the language, and if the user can change the language, then you have to, for example, add a pass to your application at the beginning, which will be /fr/en or something like that, and that will serve different builded files for AOT. Which was not the case with just-in-time, where you loaded the translation at Bootstrap. So you didn't need to do that. And you can see the arguments are almost the same as for the extraction here. So you had IATN format, out file, and local. And for the merge, you have IATN format, IATN file. Instead of out file, it's IATN file. And our local is the same. So let's see how it works if we build our application. We just basically do the same. We do the same that we did when we wanted to serve the application in this language, except that in this case it builds in this language. So one thing that is probably nice is to define the out pass to be dist/fr, for example, so that it builds everything inside of a different folder for each language. Oh, I missed. Output pass, I think. But yeah, usually you will create some script for NPM to use, or maybe you will have build a JS file that you can run that will generate all of those differently. Okay, yeah. I will show you after that how to serve your application. I have a demo with different building strategies. And yeah, if you serve with AOT, it will do exactly the same as ng-serve, except that when it rebuilds, it has to rebuild everything, so it's a bit longer. So let's see. So to serve the application, I created a small demo that is on GitHub that you can use. This is the URL. And in this demo, I created different strategies for the application. It works in just-in-time and in AOT. So it changes the bootstrap. Sorry, it's a bit small. It changes the bootstrap depending on your environment production, which are things that you can define with the CLI here. You have files, and you can define variables that you will get inside of your code, thanks to Webpack. So in this case, I assume that if it's production, it's AOT. You might want to add a different thing if you want. And if it's AOT, I just return immediately. Otherwise, I will get the language. And to do that, I will either use the current path of my application, if it's /fr/en, for example, and assume that this is the locals that you want to use. If there is no path, I will detect the language of the navigator, of the browser, and this is a bit long because depending if it's Internet Explorer or Safari or stuff like that, you have some old legacy variables that you have to use. And then I will return, in my case, I only accept en or ifr, but you can accept anything if you want. And then I get this local, and I generate the providers that I will add at Bootstrap, which, if you remember, in our case, in the simple application that we had before, we just provided this statically, but in this case we want to have some kind of dynamic local. So this is the local that was detected, and then we'll change the base href so that your application can be served from a subpass. And then I return this, and it will load the file dynamically. It uses system.import, which is something that Webpack uses, even if it's called system. And it will import. It can import file dynamically. It will actually create a bundle file for each local that you have here. And it will load the correct one when you run your application. So this is just in time. For AOT, it's really simple. It returns immediately because you will provide those information with the commands of the CLI. And then it bootstraps the application with those providers. One thing that you have to provide as well in your module, this one is the ape base href. That this allows you to serve your application from a subpass, and all of your routes with the router will use this value, so that you don't have to rewrite all of your routes every time that you change the language. You just provide this value, and it will do it with the routing module. Okay, and then in the component, we'll create a select element, which will allow you to change the language in your application. And in this case, I will reload the application completely. So I can inject the local ID that was defined at Bootstrap. And based on this local, I can select the current value inside of this select. So let's see how it works. So I created some script inside of package.json. This one is the simple serve. So let's see. In this case, it will use the just-in-time detection for your browser. And since my computer is in French, it should redirect my application to the FR part. Yeah, I don't know if you can see it, but it added the FR at the end, and my application is in French. It selected French inside of the select here. And if I click on English, it's changing my path to EN, and it reloads the application. And in the network, yeah, actually, I don't see if you can. Yeah, you don't see it. It's bundled inside of the application, the translation file. So even if you reload, you can see a difference. Okay, so this is for just in time, but for if I want to use the ng-serve with AOT, like I told you before, I can use this command start fr. And in this case, it will just it will not load the translation file at Bootstrap. It's bundled inside of the AOT files because I used I set the file here inside of the CLI. And it does exactly the same. The only thing that, in this case, since I loaded the application with local FR, if I want to use the English version, it doesn't work, you can see, because EN is not something that is available, so it redirected again to FR, because, yeah. So it's something that you should maybe take into account when you do that with the CLI, with the serve command. It's only to test one local with AOT. If you want to test multiple locals, you should do it in just in time. But for the production application, since you will build your file for each local, you won't have this error. And we will see this right now. So I created a command build all that will extract in French and English. Sorry. And this will create a folder, a separated folder for each language. So I used something, a node module, node library that is named concurrently, allows you to run both commands at the same time. It goes faster this way, so that you don't have to do it for each language. Okay. So it created both folders here. And if you want to go to inside of your AOT and search for, okay. So this is the text in French. This is Hello World in French, Bonjour le monde. And you can see that it has replaced the English strings with the French ones. And then if I want to, because in this case I already extracted the strings before, but when you extract, one thing that it can kind of complicated is that the CLI from Angular, the ng-xi atn, will replace the source file. So if you change your strings here, and then you have to merge them again inside of the French translation, because the ID can be different, and if you have to do this for all of your translations, yeah, I only have 2, but when you have a real application, you have a lot of translations. So if your translation tool doesn't allow you to merge your translation, there is this nice library that I will give you the link at the end. It's called ng-x-iatn support, and this has different tools, and one of them is xlif merge, which will, given some configuration here, you can add as many languages as you want, and when you extract, it will just take the source and merge those inside of each of your translation, and it will create each of those translation for you as well, translation files for each language that you define. So this is quite useful. Okay, so let's see how we can serve this. In this example, I created a simple Express server. If you want to use Apache, for example, there is a link at the end where there is an example of how to set up Apache for serving different languages in for the same application. But for Express, this is really a simple server that will get the header. That will get the accept languages from the request that it receives, and it will select one of them if it's available. And if you already have a base path /fr, for example, it will use this instead, and it will serve the dist folder that correspond to this language. So if I run this, and I go to the correct URL. So it selected French for me because it's in the network. You can see that my browser is sending this, where is it? Accept languages. In my case, it's French, but I can also use English if French is not available. So it selected French for me. If I change this here, since I set the base path, that's what the server will use, and it will serve the English application. So this is one way to do it with a simple Express server, but it really depends on what you use, what kind of server you use. The only thing that you have to do is serve the different AOT files depending on the locals that you detected or that the user selected. And then it reloads the application with those correct files. So this is probably something that you can easily find for depending on what you use as a server. Okay. So let's go back to the slides. So what's next for IATN? We have a lot of things to do. Some bug fixes, such as ignoring PH ACU expression for IDs. Right now, there is a bug. If you change the name of your placeholders, your variable, for example, I had items. If I change it to elements, the generated ID will be different. So this is a bug that will be fixed soon. Allow escaping ICU messages. If you want to use brackets inside of your ICU messages, this will fail right now. So we need to fix this. The missing translation strategy should work with AOT as well. And for the features, the one I'm working on right now is to be able to use IATN inside of your code. And it should be available soon. In the next couple of months, if everything goes well. We just added a new xlif format that we need to merge, and some other nice features such as auto-detecting the format or opening the API so that you can add your own format. This is not for right now, but it's something that we consider we should do to make IATN easier for users. So that, for example, if you want to use JSON instead of xlif or XMB, you should be able to do it with this. Some links. So a lot of translation tools don't really support Angular. They don't understand placeholders or ICU expressions. So those three translation tools are not perfect, but they can be used with Angular application. Text United works really well with XMB. It's a really simple tool. Crudin and OneSky are both really big solutions that will allow you to have a team and share translation and even request translation from professional translators. Both of them are really good. Crudin is free for open source, and OneSky has a free plan where you can do your translation yourself and use it for free. So this is nice as well. Some other links. This translation spreadsheet that I stole on a blog post. It's really nice when you do an application to be able to see some text if it will be too big for your design, for example. So it will use Google Translate and translate in all of the languages that Google Translate supports. And you can see that it counts the number of elements. It gives you also the language code that you can use. So in Tamil, this is really long. You should be careful if you want to use Tamil. So yeah, another link, the tools that I told you about that extract for each language and merge your translations from Martin Robb. Ames app is an application that we built at Google and that we use to showcase some of our features. I added some IATN support recently, so you can see how it works in a real application. And then 2 blog articles, deploying an IATN Angular app with the CLI by Philip Martin. It's in this article that you will find the configuration for Apache. And design for internationalization from the Dropbox design team. It gives you some nice things that you have to be careful when you create an application. For example, if you want to take right to left into account of those kind of things, if your design should take the length of the text into account, and a lot of other things that you might not know when you code your first international application. Thank you. So who here is still lost in translation after this workshop? It's okay, you can say it. Some of you here and here. Bus, come here, I have something for you. Because each of you should get something out of this workshop, so I have the nice DVD for you.
Can I use translation with universal?
Yeah, so the surf part. The surf part, originally I wanted to do with universal, but they merged it back into the core recently. And it's still a bit fresh, and I didn't have time to work on this for this workshop, but I will definitely create the IATN demo with the universal part once it's available, once I can get Rob to help me or someone from the core team that does universal. So this is definitely something that you can use. You can use IATN with the universal. You just have to be careful when you detect the language, because if you use some things that are only available on the browser, you have to be careful with the universal part. If you have other questions, otherwise I would stay around. You can come to me afterwards.